I want to talk about Martin Luther now, one of the most important figures in the history of Europe and of Christianity. Martin Luther, as you can see him pictured here as being a very young man, lived from 1483 to 1546. He was brought up under a very strict father who wanted to try to control his life. His father had been a miner and had made some money in mining, but he wanted a different life for his son. So he sent him off to the university to become a lawyer. Now, maybe some of you have people who have expectations of you, of what you're going to do with your life. Martin Luther certainly did. His father was a very powerful influence on him. So he enrolls at the University of Erfurt and begins his studies. One time when he was traveling home in 1505, of course travel back then was very difficult and dangerous because there were people who could rob you along the way. And of course you had to go on foot. There were no places to stop to eat or to rest, really. So you were on your own. But there's a terrible storm. There's lightning, thunder, the wind's blowing, trees are falling over. Martin Luther believed that he was going to die. So Martin Luther made a deal with God. Did you ever make a deal with God? Did you ever say, God, just let me pass this class and I'll change my ways. Just let me pass this test. Just let me get out of this trouble and I'll do whatever you want. Well, Martin Luther made a deal with God. And maybe unlike some of us who have made deals with God, when Martin Luther made his deal with God, he kept it. He said, if you spare me, spare my life, I will become a monk. And so you see this picture. This is Martin Luther dressed as a monk. He is on the clothes of a monk. He has the haircut, the hairstyle of a monk, a tonsured haircut. And he becomes a monk, and he becomes the best monk he can be. He's very diligent at it. And in fact, he is often confessing things to his superiors that they think are very small things, but to Martin Luther they are not. So they send Martin Luther off to Rome on a trip, hoping this will help comfort him. But on his way to Rome, he sees lots of troubles in Rome, lots of things that shouldn't be happening. He returns, he's even more concerned than before he left. And so the superior at his monk, called an abbot, said, you know, Martin, you're a kind of guy who really likes to think about things, so we're going to send you off to the university to get another degree. They send him off to the university at Wittenberg, and this is going to be a real turning point in his life. He's going to spend much of his life from this point on in Wittenberg. Still as a monk, he begins training on a doctorate, first a master's and then a doctorate, and he earns his doctorate degree in theology at the University of Wittenberg in 1512. So he's actually immediately placed into teaching. He is a professor of theology at Wittenberg in 1512. And like many new professors, he is assigned classes to teach. One of the classes that he's assigned to teach is on the book of Romans, on Paul's writings of Romans. Martin Luther all along had doubted his salvation. He never thought that he was good enough. And so what we see as he's assigned to do the book of Romans, he goes along with sees what Paul says there, but this really changes his view. Because when Paul says everybody's sinners, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, Martin Luther really accepted that idea. But then later Paul says, now apart from what we have done, Jesus has saved us. It's by Jesus' work that we're saved, not our own. This is a turning point for Martin Luther. And he comes to the idea of justification by faith. Faith alone, not faith plus works. Now, about this time, a man is coming into Germany named Tetzel, Johann Tetzel, and he's selling indulgences. Indulgences are documents that basically grant people liberation from purgatory if you make a donation. This really upsets Martin Luther, and he eventually writes down 95 things that he thinks needs to be changed with the church. He puts them on the door at the church at Wittenberg. He does this on October 31st, 1517. Well, Martin Luther really believed that the Pope was uninformed about all of these things, and he thought that the Pope wouldn't approve. What he didn't know is that the Pope knew about these indulgences. In fact, he supported it. And this eventually leads Luther to be kicked out of the Roman Catholic Church. He's excommunicated. But Frederick the Wise, the Duke of Saxony, protects Martin Luther, keeps him from being arrested by the Pope, and arranges for a meeting called the Diet of Worms. Not the Diet of Worms, but the Diet of Worms. And in 1521, Luther, as is depicted in this painting, comes to Worms, and here he is told, they place all of his writings there, and they tell him to recant everything he has written. His response is, I will recant if you can show me from Scripture that what I've written is wrong. But he said, otherwise, here I stand. I cannot, I will not recant. So help me God. And this becomes then the major turning point in the history of the church, and we see the Protestant movement beginning and the Protestant church beginning with Martin Luther.